All right, so let's get into this idea of the antisocial century.
Yeah.
You sent over this really interesting article from The Atlantic
Right.
about how Americans are spending more and more time alone.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm really fascinated to kind of dig into how that's, reshaping everything from our personalities
Yeah.
to our politics.
Yeah, no, it's a fascinating piece. What's really striking is it's not just about being physically alone, but it's about this kind of active choosing of solitude.
Right.
The article kicks off with this powerful image of a bar
Okay.
that was once bustling with life, and now it's just eerily quiet, filled with just takeout bags.
Yeah, it is a stark visual.
Right.
It's like a snapshot of how we're opting to kind of like cocoon ourselves at home.
Yes.
Even for things that we used to consider social.
Exactly.
Like grabbing dinner or a drink.
Precisely. And this trend really extends far beyond just takeout. We see it in how we consume entertainment, how we work, even how we engage with our faith communities.
Yeah.
It's like remote life has just permeated every facet of our existence.
I mean, the article acknowledges the concerns about, a loneliness epidemic.
Right.
But it makes this point that loneliness levels aren't actually skyrocketing, even as our alone time is increasing, which is a bit of a head scratcher.
It is. It is, and it really suggests that we're not just isolated, but we're often choosing to be.
Yeah.
The American Time Use Survey reveals this significant drop in in-person socializing, like over 20%.
Wow.
Between 2003 and 2023.
Okay.
That's a massive shift.
Yeah.
In a relatively short time frame.
Over 20%.
Yeah.
That's huge.
And the article points out that it's even more pronounced for young people and single men, closer to 35%.
So what's driving this preference for solitude?
Well,
especially among those groups.
The article delves into some historical context and traces the roots back to the rise of cars and televisions in the 20th century.
Right.
Think about it. Cars gave us this personal mobility that allowed us to spread out from these densely populated urban centers.
Right.
And then TVs brought entertainment directly into our homes.
It's almost like those innovations laid the groundwork for us to prioritize private space over public gatherings.
Yes. And then came the smartphone, the ultimate enabler of solitude. It's not just the sheer amount of time we're spending on these devices, though that's certainly part of it.
Yeah.
Teenagers, for instance, are spending upwards of 30% of their waking lives staring at screens.
That's a staggering statistic.
It is.
I mean, what are the long-term implications of that, especially for a generation that's growing up with this level of digital immersion?
Well, the article links this trend to the rise in teen anxiety and depression, suggesting it's not merely about being a bit less social,
but about potential mental health consequences.
Right.
It really highlights this growing concern that excessive screen time may be hindering the development of crucial social skills, particularly for adolescents.
It makes me think about how much harder it seems for young people to navigate basic social situations now.
Right.
It's as if they're missing out on that essential real-world practice.
Exactly. And this isn't just a teen issue.
Right.
The article argues that this remote life is impacting adults as well.
Okay.
We work from home. We shop online. We entertain ourselves with streaming services. And some even attend religious services virtually.
Yeah.
Our homes are increasingly designed around screens.
Right.
Not social interaction.
It's true. I hadn't really considered how much the physical design of our homes might be reinforcing these solitary habits.
Yeah, we're essentially creating these self-contained bubbles.
Right.
Minimizing the need to venture out and interact with the world.
Yeah.
Beyond our screens.
And the article makes this particularly compelling point about the impact of this shift on men, especially regarding the idea of neededness.
Right.
Can you elaborate on that a bit?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Historically, men often derived a sense of purpose and value from feeling essential to others, whether it was through their work, their community involvement, or even just fixing things around the house.
Yeah.
There was this tangible sense of contributing to something larger than themselves.
But with the rise of this solo sedentary lifestyle, are we saying those traditional roles are fading?
In many ways, yes. The article uses this term, secular monks,
Oh, wow.
to describe this phenomenon.
Okay.
We're increasingly focused on self-optimization and personal comfort.
Right.
but perhaps at the expense of feeling truly needed and connected.
It's a fascinating, albeit somewhat unsettling thought.
Right.
It makes me wonder if this retreat into our private spheres is also contributing
to the increasing polarization we see in society today.
That's an excellent point, and it's something the article explores in depth.
Okay.
It argues that this social isolation has profound political ramifications, impacting not just our individual well-being, but also how we interact as citizens.
So how does this all tie into the political landscape?
Well, the article introduces this concept of the middle ring of relationships, which refers to those connections we have with people who are familiar but not necessarily intimate.
Right.
Our neighbors, acquaintances, people we encounter in our communities.
It's like that social fabric that weaves us together
precisely
beyond our immediate circles.
And the article contends that this middle ring is eroding. We're increasingly interacting only with our closest friends and family or with like-minded individuals online.
So we're losing touch with those weak ties that expose us to different perspectives and help us bridge social divides.
Exactly. And that has profound implications for our political discourse. When we primarily engage with people who already agree with us, we become less tolerant of opposing viewpoints, loading to greater polarization and a diminished capacity for civil dialogue.
The article brings up a striking example, those Harris walls, obviously.
Yes.
Lawn signs.
That example perfectly illustrates how many people were genuinely taken aback by the level of support for the other side. They were living in a bubble. Their online and social circles reinforcing their own beliefs while obscuring the reality of diverse perspectives existing in their own communities.
It's a stark reminder of how our increasingly isolated lives can distort our perception of the world.
And the article goes even further, suggesting that this social detachment might be driving some individuals toward more extreme and even destructive political ideologies. It explores this idea of a need for chaos, where social isolation creates this void that can be filled with unhealthy impulses and a yearning for disruption.
It's a sobering thought, but it makes sense if people are feeling disconnected and disenfranchised. They might be more susceptible to radical ideologies that offer a sense of belonging or purpose, even if that purpose is destructive.
It speaks to the deeper psychological effects of this social detachment. When we lose our sense of connection and belonging, it can have far-reaching consequences, impacting not just our personal lives, but also the stability and health of society as a whole.
So with all these factors at play, the historical context, the role of technology, these psychological and political implications, is there any way to push back against these trends? Or are we simply destined to become a society of isolated individuals, each retreating further into their own digital bubbles?
It's a crucial question, and thankfully the article does offer some glimmers of hope. It introduces this concept of emistics.
This idea of being more intentional about the technologies we embrace.
Exactly. It's not about rejecting technology altogether, but rather about making deliberate choices about the tools we allow into our lives and how we use them. The Amish community provides a fascinating case study.
That's interesting. How so?
Well, they're incredibly selective about the technologies they adopt, choosing only those that align with their values and their community-oriented way of life. They recognize that certain technologies, while perhaps convenient or entertaining, can undermine their social fabric and spiritual well-being.
So are they completely off the grid then? No cars, no electricity?
Not entirely. They might utilize a car for transportation to a neighboring town for work or use a gas-powered washing machine, but they won't have a phone in their home. And they prioritize face-to-face interaction above all else.
It's a fascinating example of how a community can consciously choose which aspects of modern technology to embrace and which to reject based on their core values.
And there are signs that this kind of thinking is starting to take hold in broader society as well. The article mentions the movement to ban smartphones in schools, for instance.
I've heard about it. It's a pretty bold step.
It is.
But I can see the logic behind it.
Right.
Yeah.
It stems from a growing recognition that constant connectivity can come at the expense of deeper, more meaningful interactions, particularly for young people who are still developing their social skills.
It makes me think of all the times I see families out at a restaurant, everyone glued to their phones instead of talking to each other. We've become so accustomed to these devices that we often fail to recognize how they might be hindering our ability to connect on a deeper level.
Absolutely. And it's not just about schools. We're seeing a resurgence of interest in real-world experiences and shared spaces as well. The article highlights the boom in independent bookstores, for example.
I've noticed that too. It's encouraging to see people returning
It is.
to these physical spaces.
And what's interesting is how many of these bookstores are becoming more than just places to buy books. They're transforming into community hubs, hosting events, book clubs, author readings, and creating spaces for people to connect and engage with each other.
So it's like they're fulfilling a need that goes beyond just the act of purchasing a book.
Precisely, it's about the serendipitous discovery, the tactile experience of browsing shelves, the conversations struck up with fellow book lovers. It's about that sense of community that's difficult to replicate in the sterile environment of online shopping.
And it's not just bookstores, right? There's also the rise of board game cafes.
Exactly.
Which seems almost ironic, taking something traditionally done at home and bringing it into a social setting.
But it speaks to a deeper yearning for face-to-face interaction, for the kind of shared experience you simply can't get through a screen.
I get that there's something about the tangible presence of other people, the laughter, the friendly competition, the nonverbal cues that just can't be replicated digitally.
You're right. And then these are just a few examples. The article also mentions community gardens, book clubs, even the growing popularity of adult sports leagues. It's like a quiet rebellion against the antisocial century. A recognition that we're inherently social creatures, hardwired for connection.
It's truly inspiring to see these efforts to reclaim a sense of community and shared experience.
Yes.
It suggests that we're not simply resigning ourselves to this slide into isolation.
Absolutely. And it reinforces the idea that these middle ring relationships aren't just nice to have. They're essential for a healthy society. They're the threads that weave us together. Fostering trust, cooperation, and a sense of belonging.
And as we've discussed, when those connections fray, it has a ripple effect on our politics, our mental health, our sense of shared purpose. So the question becomes, how do we strengthen those connections? How do we rebuild those bridges of community that have been weakened by decades of isolation and technological distraction?
That's where things get really interesting, and it's a question we'll delve into more deeply in the next part of our Dip Dive.
Great. I'm eager to hear more about potential solutions and how we can resist this pull towards isolation.
We'll explore a range of approaches, from individual actions we can take in our daily lives to broader societal shifts that can foster greater connection.
Sounds fascinating. Can't wait to unpack it all. But for now, let's take a pause and come back to this intriguing conversation in just a bit.
Sounds good.
So before the break, we were talking about this this quiet rebellion against the antisocial century, these glimmers of hope that are emerging as people are seeking out real-world connections and pushing back against the dominance of technology. It feels like we're at a crossroads, doesn't it?
I think so.
Like we have to consciously decide how we want to shape our relationship with both technology and each other.
You've hit the nail on the head. The antisocial century presents this stark warning, but it also offers this opportunity for course correction. It's a wake-up call to re-examine our values, our habits, and what we truly prioritize.
It may be a chance to rediscover the importance of human connection, not just as a feel-good luxury, but as a fundamental need.
Exactly.
The article makes a strong case for this, especially when it comes to those middle ring relationships, the connections with neighbors, acquaintances, people we encounter in our daily lives.
It's about recognizing that those seemingly casual interactions contribute to a healthy society.
Okay.
They foster trust and cooperation and a sense of belonging.
Yeah.
They're the building blocks of community,
Right.
even if they don't always feel profound in the moment.
Right. Like chatting with the barista while you're waiting for your coffee.
Exactly.
Or striking up a conversation with someone at the dog park.
Yeah.
Those small interactions add up.
Exactly. And as we've discussed, when those connections weaken, it has ripple effects on everything from our political discourse to our mental well-being.
So the question becomes, how do we foster these connections?
Yeah.
How do we rebuild those bridges of community?
Well, the article seems to suggest it starts with being more mindful of those 15-minute blocks in our day.
Right.
Those seemingly insignificant pockets of time where we could choose connection over isolation.
So instead of automatically scrolling through social media while waiting for the bus, what if we looked up and smiled at the person next to us? Maybe even struck up a conversation.
Exactly.
Or instead of ordering takeout and eating alone, what if we invited a friend or neighbor over for dinner?
Yes. It's about seizing those small opportunities for interaction and being willing to step outside our comfort zones.
You know, I recently read an article about the rise of death cafes.
Oh, wow.
Gatherings where people come together to talk about death and dying.
Interesting.
It sounds a bit morbid, I know.
Yeah.
But the idea is that talking openly about death can actually help us connect more deeply with life and with each other.
That's a fascinating example. It speaks to our need for authentic connection, even around topics that might feel uncomfortable or taboo.
Yeah.
And it highlights another important point. It's not just about spontaneous interactions. It's also about creating spaces and rituals that encourage connection.
Right, like having a standing coffee date with a friend, joining a book club, or even starting a weekly potluck with neighbors.
Those regular gatherings provide a sense of anticipation and belonging.
Yeah.
They give us something to look forward to, a reason to put down our phones and engage with the world around us.
And it seems like there's a growing recognition of this need, even in the digital realm. I've noticed a lot of online communities forming around shared interests or hobbies, everything from knitting groups to virtual book clubs.
That's a great observation.
Yeah.
It suggests that even in our increasingly digital world, we're still seeking out those connections, finding ways to bridge the distance and build community online.
It makes me wonder, though, if these online communities can ever truly replace the richness of face-to-face interaction. Is there something inherently different about connecting with someone in the flesh?
That's a really important question. And I think there's some key differences. For one, online interactions often lack the nonverbal cues, facial expressions, body language, tone of voice that convey so much meaning in face-to-face conversations.
It's like trying to interpret a text message without knowing the sender's tone. You can easily misinterpret their intent.
Exactly. And those nonverbal cues are crucial for building trust and empathy. They help us understand the nuances of human emotion and connect on a deeper level.
And I imagine online interactions are also more susceptible to miscommunication and conflict, especially in anonymous forums where people feel emboldened to say things they might never say in person.
That's certainly true. Online platforms can often amplify negative emotions and create a breeding ground for hostility and polarization. So while they can certainly facilitate connection, it's important to be aware of their limitations and to prioritize those real-world interactions whenever possible.
This whole conversation makes me think of that famous study about happiness.
Oh, yeah.
You know, the one where researchers tracked Harvard graduates over decades and found that close relationships, more than money or fame, were the key to a fulfilling life.
Oh, absolutely. The Grant study, it's a classic. And it underscores that fundamental human need for connection. We're wired for it, and it's essential for our well-being, both individually and collectively.
It's like that saying, happiness is only real when shared.
I love that. And it's a powerful reminder that we're not meant to go through life alone, isolated in our own little bubbles. We need each other.
So what you're saying is, even though we're living in this increasingly digital age, with all its distractions and temptations to retreat into solitude, we can't afford to neglect the importance of face-to-face interaction, of building those genuine real-world connections.
Exactly. And And the good news is
Yeah.
there are countless opportunities to do just that.
Okay.
It starts with making conscious choices in our daily lives, putting down our phones, engaging with the people around us,
Right.
seeking out those shared experiences that foster connection.
It's like a muscle we need to exercise.
Yes.
The more we practice those small acts of connection, the stronger those bonds become,
Right.
both within ourselves and within our communities.
I couldn't have said it better myself.
Yeah.
And this brings us to another fascinating aspect of this discussion.
Okay.
The role of artificial intelligence.
Right.
We've talked about how AI companions could potentially exacerbate our isolation.
Right.
But it's important to remember that AI is a tool.
Okay.
And like any tool, it can be used for good or for ill.
You're referring to that chilling idea of having these always agreeable,
Right.
always validating digital entities that could further detach us from the messiness of real human relationships.
Right. It's like a Black Mirror episode waiting to happen.
Right.
But it's not a foregone conclusion.
Okay.
Question is, how do we ensure that AI serves humanity
Right.
rather than undermines it?
Yeah. How do we prevent it from becoming a force for isolation and division?
That's a crucial question.
Yeah.
Especially as AI technology continues to advance at such a rapid pace.
It's like we're standing at the edge of a new frontier.
Yes.
And we need to be incredibly mindful of the potential consequences.
I completely agree.
Yeah.
It will require careful consideration, ethical guidelines, and a commitment to using this powerful technology in ways that benefit humanity.
Yeah.
Not just individual companies or governments.
So it's not just about the technology itself, but about the intentions behind it.
Yeah, exactly.
And the choices we make about how to implement it.
We need to be asking ourselves some tough questions.
Yeah, like what
values are we encoding into these AI systems?
Okay.
What are the potential unintended consequences? And how can we ensure that AI is used to enhance our lives, not detract from them?
It feels like we're at a pivotal moment.
Yes.
Where we have the opportunity to shape the future of AI in a way that aligns with our values and our vision for a more connected, more humane world.
You're right. And while the potential risks are certainly real, there are also exciting possibilities to explore.
Like what?
For instance, imagine using AI to facilitate social interaction, to connect people with shared interests, to create more inclusive and accessible communities.
It's like using technology to bridge the very gaps it's created instead of isolating us. It can help us overcome geographical barriers, language differences, other obstacles that prevent us from connecting with others. It can even help us understand each other better. Breaking those divides of perspective to contribute to polarization and conflict.
Imagine AI algorithms that could identify common ground between people with differing viewpoints, helping them find areas of agreement, and fostering constructive dialogue.
That's a really intriguing concept.
Yeah.
It's like using AI to help us rediscover the art of civil discourse and rebuild those bridges of understanding that have been eroded by our increasingly polarized world.
Precisely. And that's just one example.
Okay.
There's also the potential for AI to assist with accessibility, allowing people with disabilities to participate more fully in social interactions and community events.
Or to provide companionship and support for elderly individuals who might be experiencing loneliness or isolation.
The possibilities are vast. And it's up to us to ensure that we're harnessing this powerful technology for good.
So while the rise of AI presents real challenges, it also offers a glimmer of hope. It's like we're standing at a fork in the road.
Yes.
And the path we choose will determine whether AI becomes a force for connection or a catalyst for further isolation.
And that choice ultimately comes down to the values we prioritize and the actions we take. It's up to us to ensure that AI serves humanity, not the other way around.
Well said. This conversation has been incredibly thought-provoking.
Yes.
We've covered a lot of ground.
We have.
Exploring the historical context of the antisocial century, the impact of technology, the psychological and political implications, and even the potential role of AI.
And we've seen how this trend towards isolation isn't just a personal issue. It has far-reaching consequences for the health of our communities and the future of society as a whole.
But as we've also discussed, it's not inevitable. We have the power to choose a different path.
We do.
To make conscious choices that prioritize connection, community, and shared experience.
And it starts with each of us.
Yeah.
In those small, everyday moments.
That's 15-minute blocks.
That's 15-minute blocks.
Yeah.
It's about being present, engaging with the people around us, and creating spaces for meaningful interaction.
So what does this all mean for our listeners?
Yeah.
How are they experiencing this antisocial century?
Right.
And what steps can they take to reclaim connection and build a more fulfilling, more connected life?
That's a great question, and one we'll explore in more depth in the final part of our deep dive.
Great. I'm eager to delve into those practical strategies and to hear what our listeners have to say about their own experiences.
Sure.
So we've been exploring this idea of the antisocial century, and how it's impacting us on so many levels.
Right.
But I'm curious to kind of shift gears a bit now and talk about what we can do about it.
Yeah.
What are some practical steps we can take to combat this trend and reclaim a sense of connection in our lives?
Well, that's a great question. And it's encouraging to remember that even amidst these, concerning trends, there are proactive steps that we can take.
Yeah.
It's not about some grand sweeping overhaul of our lives, but rather a series of small intentional choices.
Yeah, I like that. Small intentional choices.
Yeah.
It feels less daunting that way.
Right.
So where do we begin?
Well, the article emphasizes the power of those 15-minute blocks we talked about earlier. Those seemingly insignificant pockets of time throughout our day where we could choose connection over isolation.
Right.
It's about being mindful of those moments and making a conscious effort to engage with the world around us.
Can you give us some concrete examples?
Absolutely. Imagine you're commuting to work on the train.
Okay.
Instead of automatically reaching for your phone, try striking up a conversation with the person sitting next to you.
Right.
It might feel a bit awkward at first, but you might be surprised by the connections you can make.
It's like challenging ourselves to break out of our routines and embrace those unexpected moments of human interaction.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Or imagine you're grabbing lunch.
Okay.
Instead of eating at your desk or scrolling through social media, consider inviting a colleague to join you. Even a short lunch break can be a great opportunity to connect and build relationships.
I often find myself working through lunch to try and get ahead.
Right.
But you're right, taking that time to connect with someone can be so much more rewarding.
And it's not just about work.
Okay.
Think about those times when you might typically retreat into solitude.
Yeah.
Maybe you're running errands on the weekend or waiting for an appointment.
Right.
What if you used those moments as opportunities to engage with the people around you? Smile at the cashier, chat with the person in line behind you.
Yeah.
Offer to help someone struggling with their groceries.
I admit I'm often guilty of just putting my headphones in and tuning everything out when I'm out and about.
Yeah.
It's like I'm trying to create my own little bubble of solitude in the midst of the chaos.
I understand that impulse.
Yeah.
But what if we flipped the script and saw those moments as opportunities for connection?
Right.
Instead of intrusions on our solitude.
Yeah, it's a subtle shift in perspective.
It is.
But it can have a big impact.
Yes.
And beyond those spontaneous interactions, what about more structured ways to build community?
That's a great point.
Yeah.
Joining a club or group centered around a shared interest is a fantastic way to meet like-minded people and forge lasting connections.
Okay.
It could be anything from a book club or a hiking group.
Right.
To a volunteer organization or a sports league.
I recently joined a community garden.
Oh, that's great.
And it's been such a rewarding experience, not only by learning about gardening, but I've also met some wonderful people in my neighborhood who I probably wouldn't have crossed paths with otherwise.
That's fantastic.
Yeah.
It's a perfect example of how shared activities can foster a sense of community and create those middle ring connections that are so vital.
And it doesn't have to be a formal group either.
Exactly.
Right.
Consider hosting a potluck dinner, starting a game night with friends, or even just inviting your neighbors over for a casual barbecue.
It's about creating those rituals of connection.
Yes.
Those regular opportunities to come together and build relationships.
Precisely. I love that.
And remember, it's not just about quantity,
Right.
It's about quality, too.
Okay.
It's about being present in those interactions, really listening to what others have to say, and sharing your own thoughts and feelings authentically.
It's like that saying, be the person you needed when you were younger.
I love that.
Yeah. And sometimes the most meaningful connections come from simply being there for someone, offering a listening ear, a shoulder to cry on, or a helping hand.
You know, this whole conversation has really got me thinking about the ways I could be more intentional about fostering connection in my own life.
Yeah.
I'm realizing that I often default to solitude, even when I might actually be craving interaction.
Right.
It's like I've gotten so comfortable in my own little bubble that I've forgotten how enriching it can be to step outside of it.
I think that's a common experience, especially in our fast-paced, digitally driven world.
Right.
We're constantly bombarded with stimuli and often feel overwhelmed by the sheer volume of interactions we're expected to navigate.
Yeah.
It's natural to seek solace in solitude, but it's important to remember that we're not meant to live in isolation. We thrive on connection.
It's like we've forgotten how to be alone together, to be in the presence of others without feeling the need to fill every silence with chatter or distraction.
You've hit on something really important there.
Yeah.
There's a beauty in simply being present with others, even in silence.
Yeah.
Think about those moments of shared quiet,
Okay.
watching a sunset together, listening to music, or simply enjoying a meal without the need for constant conversation.
Right.
Those moments can be incredibly connecting.
It's like we need to rediscover the art of stillness.
Yes.
Both within ourselves and in our relationship.
Exactly. And it's in those moments of stillness that we often find the deepest connections.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into the antisocial century, what's the key takeaway you hope our listeners will walk away with?
I think the most important message is that while the trends we've discussed are real and concerning, they're not inevitable.
Okay.
We have the power to choose a different path, to make conscious choices that prioritize connection, community, and shared experience. And it starts with each of us in those small everyday moments.
Right.
It's about putting down our phones, looking up, and engaging with the world around us.
It's about remembering that we're not alone in this.
Yes.
We're all in this together.
Yeah.
And we have the power to create a more connected, more humane world, one interaction at a time.
Beautifully said.
This has been a truly insightful conversation.
That has.
Thank you so much for joining us today and for sharing your wisdom.
It's been a pleasure.
To all our listeners out there, thanks for tuning in to this deep dive into the antisocial century. We hope this conversation has sparked some new ideas and inspired you to think differently about the role of connection in your own life.
Absolutely.
Remember, even small changes can make a big difference.
Right.
So go out there, connect with someone, and see what happens.
Yes.
Until next time, be well and stay connected.